Henry Ford II gave his engineers an impossible task. In the span of just 90 days, they had to design and build what is regarded by many as the greatest V8 engine ever made, in order to stop Ford from getting their ass handed to them in NASCAR. For those painstaking 90 days, we would see the rapid innovation and ingenuity of Ford's engineering team culminating together with the diabolical 427 SOHC motor, also known as the camme. See, once Chrysler's 426 cubic inch HEMI V8 debuted in 1964, the trajectory of American horsepower would be changed forever. Up until this point, the American arms race in terms of horsepower had gone like this. Manufacturers had been incrementally punching out their V8s to make them bigger and more powerful than one another. The progression, though, was fairly uniform, and everyone was more or less playing in the same sandbox. Until Chrysler used a healthy dose of C4 and blew the sandbox wide open. This was their game now. Ford and General Motors had to scramble to figure out how they could compete and win against this new HEMI heavyweight, which just clinched a 1-2-3 finish at the Daytona 500 in 1964. For Ford, this really couldn't have happened at a worse time. The Blue Oval at this point was fighting a multi-front war in terms of their racing efforts. The GT40 project was just getting underway, and Ford was now prepping V8s for the IndyCar series. The full-fledged assault on performance was now part of Ford's mission plan to expand its market share through racing dominance. And one of the problems we've gone well involved, certainly they could not be using Dodge domestically for NASCAR at the same time. Those NASCAR motor introduced by 1954 was the 427 High-Riser V8, which, up until that point, was the big daddy of all the FE Series Ford motors. These engines, by and large, were very successful in NASCAR when fitted with the contemporary Galaxy race cars of the time. But the new HEMI posed a serious threat. The 427 had to go under the knife into its next evolution, which would become the 427 SOHC. The idea behind it was that these 427 FE motors had been so well race-proven up to this point that the engineers wanted to stretch that core platform to see how far they could take it while still utilizing the same internals. However, with the NASCAR displacement rules at the time, they also couldn't increase the displacement of the engine. 427 cubic inches was the cap. So if they couldn't make the engine any bigger, they would have to make it more efficient. The entire FE family of Ford V8s were all pushrod motors, which was the prevailing design for American V8s at the time, largely because they were compact in terms of a V8 and they were cheap to produce. With a typical pushrod V8 engine, the camshaft sits inside the block itself. The cam actuates the pushrods, which are rods that transfer the motion from the camshaft to operate the intake and exhaust valves, to put it simply. Ford determined that they were not going to be able to eke out the extra performance that they needed from the 427 with its pushrod setup, and as such, made the decision to convert these new motors to a single overhead cam design. With a single overhead cam design in a V8, there would now be two camshafts instead of one, with one camshaft controlling each cylinder bank of the V. By doing so, they would be able to give the engine less reciprocating weight, which allowed for higher rev limits and more aggressive cam profiles, which would be the secret to spinning this new motor up to over 7,500 RPM and making an immense 600 plus horsepower while doing so. This was a major improvement over the initial design. Just like with Raycon's everyday earbuds. See, Raycon's everyday earbuds are made to make your everyday just that little bit easier. With their active noise cancellation and super long 32-hour battery life, these are just perfect when you're doing work around the house or even when you're watching one of my videos. And the quality of Raycons rivals some of the biggest names in professional audio, but at half the price of the other guy. And the new active noise cancellation feature is amazing for watching that next video and tuning out the outside world. Way better than any of the other earbuds that I've tried. And they even offer these awesome protective case covers like this one here that not only protect your earbuds, but also allow them to wirelessly charge with the case on them. And if you go to buyraycon.com/rarecars today, you can get 20 to 50% off site-wide. That's right, you get up to 50% off on everything on Raycon's website when you go to buyraycon.com/rarecars. So click that link in the description below and get your Raycons today. But now, back to the video. To make this change, the base 427 block was fitted with an idler gear shaft where the original camshaft bore was, as well as a new and improved oiling system to accommodate the overhead cam design. Cross-bolted main bearing caps were also added to strengthen the block to deal with the increased stress of the higher RPM that was achievable with the single overhead cam design. New high-flowing cast iron heads which contain the cams were first designed for the single overhead cam application. These also happen to be a semi-hemispherical head design, which does mean that technically the 427 SOHC motor could also be considered a HEMI engine, which is pretty neat. And a whopping 6 feet of timing chain was what tied the two separate camshafts and the crankshaft together with the help of an idler and tensioner arm mounted to the heads. A myriad of other small changes were made to the existing 427 FE block to prep it for its single overhead cam conversion, like plugging some of the original oil passages. But we can skip all those really minute details for the sake of time and get down to brass tacks. Power figures. When equipped with a single Holley 4-barrel carburetor, this new monster made a ridiculous 616 horsepower at 7,000 RPM and 515 foot-pounds of torque at 3,800 RPM. And when fitted with a twin 4-barrel carb setup, those figures climbed even further to 657 horsepower at 7,500 RPM and 575 foot-pounds of torque at 4,200 RPM. These were world-beating numbers at the time, and as an X factor for NASCAR, this motor could have very well wiped the floor with the competition, even the Chrysler HEMIs. However, NASCAR President Bill France had decided by this point that this new single overhead cam engine design was simply too European for NASCAR. And NASCAR decided that to keep with the spirit of the sport, they could not allow it to compete. Which that justification is total BS because it's still for all intents and purposes a regular 427 Ford block. NASCAR outright banned the Chrysler HEMI and the Ford 427 SOHC motors from running in 1965. Ford tried pretty much everything that they could to convince NASCAR to allow them to run the SOHC motor that year, but it was to no avail. And with all the parts collecting dust on the shelf and an unsure future for the motor in NASCAR, Ford had to explore other avenues for their new Frankenstein creation. And they felt that there was no more logical place to deploy this engine than in the hands of some of the fastest drivers in the drag racing scene, or work out deals to supply these new motors to drivers such as Connie Kalitta and Lou Sneaky Pete Robinson, to name a few. They entrusted these drivers with the rollout for this new power plant, and within months it was clear that the 427 SOHC was now about to put the world on notice. These engines would first find their way into actual top-fuel dragsters, not just road car-based drag cars. These ones were supercharged and they would be pushed to the brink of their mechanical limits. Connie Kalitta was the first one to really put the 427 SOHC through its paces, and is claimed to be the first person to have used it to hit 200 miles per hour in a quarter mile in his dragster, circa a 1965 AHRA event. But there is some contention around that claim from other drivers who ran the same motor, saying they hit those speeds first. Nonetheless, it was at these insane speeds at the upper echelon of top-fuel dragster performance where the 427 SOHC motors did begin to exhibit some of their weak points, though. Ed Pink is quoted via a Motor Trend article saying that the problem in their application of the 427 SOHC was that it was meant to handle maybe 750 horsepower, and we were getting 2,500 horsepower out of it. We would be lucky to get 4 runs for qualifying and 4 for eliminations from a block. And if we did, the crank would be laying in the bottom of a broken-up block. Now granted, these motors were being pushed to nearly 4 times the power that they were built to normally run. Racers did work to solve some of these reliability woes for the top fuel applications, but even with those, the potential of these engines was still so insane that more people started jumping on the SOHC ship, or to put even more money and effort behind the project as well, trickling the 427 SOHC motor down into the AFX class first in 1965 with the factory-supported 427 Comets, and then in 1966 as well. From 1964 to 1967, Ford produced an estimated 500 427 SOHC crate motors as far as what I was able to research. These motors, while never actually fitted to any production cars, trickled their way into a variety of purpose-built race cars across the country, spanning a variety of levels of performance. And at all levels, the 427 SOHC was a serious competitor. This engine helped dyno Don Nicholson rack up an insane 130-10 record with his 427 SOHC-powered Mercury cars. And it helped win hundreds, if not thousands of races for people across the country, all coming from a Frankenstein V8 that was engineered in just 90 days. The legend of the 427 SOHC, coupled with its extreme rarity, makes this one of the most valuable engines around, with 3 being sold on Bring a Trailer in the last few years for $45,000, $60,000, and a whopping $140,000. In period, this motor was a monster. There's no two questions about it. Everyone universally respected it, and even the biggest blue oval haters out there would have a hard time denying that this is not one of the greatest V8 engines ever made. And the only real reason that racers stopped using them is because there were so few of them made that it was difficult to find replacement parts for them. And I truly do think this is one of the greatest engines ever made. This limited production engine set the world on fire, and its success can partially be to thank for Ford's new commitment to the overhead cam V8s of today, which they resurrected in the 1990s with the 4.6-liter V8 and have culminated to the Coyote engine today, which is one of the few naturally aspirated V8s left standing. And let me know in the comments down below if you think the 427 SOHC is one of the greatest engines of all time, or if you're one of the very select few who think it's overrated. But as always, thank you all for watching another video. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me a lot. And otherwise, until next time,